Greetings, everyone, and thank you, Eric, for this opportunity, and thank you, everyone, for sticking around. I'm Tom Yeager, here in the famous sector called Montrose in our fine city of Houston in this foolish state of Texas. In Houston, Montrose is where our pilgrims and poets, our progressives, and our pronouners are the preponderation of the population. I am a noisy champion of this neighborhood, so some people call me the Bard of Montrose. And my home has long been a pattern exemplar of the modus vivendi in this fertile field of freedom, this enclave of expression, this domain for dissension where societal solutions are the invention. In the early 70s, I joined and was soon managing a commune, and out of it, I built a haven where an ever-changing cadre of serious activists and artists could thrive in their trades. And that kept my castle connected to the cosmos more than any commoner could conjure. It's just me and my one and only now, and it's much calmer. But for nearly 50 years, we enabled, or we were, change agents for the world and creators of static and performance art of nearly every genre. Beaver busy were the bywords, art the obsession, and activism our obligation. We were junkies for it all, and we always got our fix. Oh, the memories of those days. And my story of this day will cover, well, none of that magic mix. I just mention it because if you had been there with me, I'd have learned how to tell about it. I'm not able to replicate, say, the great Fran Stallings of Oklahoma, the best I know justice and environmental teller. Nor can I pen a tale of music, dance, and folklore as does the good Dr. Eric Miller. But maybe luck will lead today, and you'll gain a crooked smile and a nod of recognition, for really that's my only art-centric ambition. As one guild leader told me many times, Tom, a teller like you can't even think about ending their story without first beginning it. So I guess I'll get on with it. Last year, in similar hot summer weather and the bliss of our cohabitating our household together, or having to hold our old house together is just as true, my partner Sarah sent a self-satisfied signal for me to take up my seat and to take down her say. She took a sip of her moringa tea, and I could just tell that she would issue a boastful announcement of a bold achievement. My darling, to me, her words she spoke, words so curious that wonderment spurred. Beyond wonderment, behold, my awakening sparked. Due to awakening, soon forth some weaving spilled. To give weavings their hold, word working inspired. Through word working, a story at once outspooled. So at once to you of what was, I'll speak. For of what was your interest, or I'm weak for a wag, will surely spike. I call this story The Box. You may think it meanders as much as the Mississippi or some river or another, but I have analyzed and concluded that it's just that one thing leads to another. So back to the box, and the remainder to you I'll now tell it, and if remember you do, you'll then know it. Sarah opened our discussion with her confession. Well, I took the towels down off the windows today. What about you? And I, having completed no accomplishment comparable, called out a compliment toward her competence. That's some great work, sweetheart, I said. I never doubted you'd get to it. And I added, but But I want to bring word that I wonder whether it would be or wouldn't be wiser to wipe away that worn out white wardrobe our windows wear in the witch of the winter, my dear, by say the end of April one year. Oh my, I thought this might happen. Of course, it's often said that the storytelling by and for adults audience is renowned for its intelligence and the tellers for their attentiveness. And I will note that today's group surpasses the norm, but unfortunately I find a few fevered freckles in front of me. So before I fling out Sarah's feedback to my attempt to get her to retailor her timetable of the towel, I deem that some details from our diary are due for delivery about the digs in which we dwell. For as my eyes mosey over this muster, I imagine not many members of this mighty amalgam made it to the magical music, the many meetings of munching meals or miscellaneous merrymaking we'd mount month after month with my many minions in my Montrose mansionette, so for a minute or more you might mind what I'll mention. Now, our longtime regular callers launched songs about our righteous quarters, our noble pile, I call it. But really, a few dump trucks to the landfill someday soon might haul it. You see, well, our oldies could see that it has accumulated 1.13 centuries of age. It's past its prime and past the expiration date as the neighborhood all the rage. Long ago, I lost count of the times I overheard a regular say how bravely we live with 1.13 centuries of decay. Indeed, it is shaky and it seems, so it seems, and in the winter months as draws so near the dreariness, Sarah dreads and fears the draftiness. Now for years I sought a suitable solution to Sarah's silly shivers to no avail until one day, at a fancy estate sale, on a whim, I invested in a fine collection of raggedy old towels. And now each December, Sarah rolls those towels up on their long side and sets the towel sausages onto our sashes where there's cessation of their seals. And that weakens the wintry wind through our worn out windows and works well for wheat. But of course, those winter towels must someday come down. So back to my hint that a timing adjustment be found. Sarah's response? Silence, and that spoke with abundance. However, continuing our conference, she adopted a demeanor, a dutiful demonstration that she did indeed endorse that day for development. My development. She said, while taking down those raggedy old towels that with full fanfare you conferred to me, my dear, for our anniversary, 1 year, I couldn't help but notice one towel that's not quite as raggedy old as your own bath towel. So I wondered if you wanted to swap them. Well, I gasped, began to sputter wildly, and a knot moved in my chest where a knot's not normally known to navigate, because I wasn't ready for that. So she let me stew, and Sarah walked away wondering as I put my pate to pondering why I'd had such a visceral gut reaction to her very good suggestion. Well, a flood of memories swept over me, going all the way back. And the earliest of those memories was of me between toddler and tyke, climbing out of a swimming pool into a cold breeze and being wrapped up by my grandmother with a very fine towel. And all the other memories were of our vacations and our holidays down through the years, always at my grandmother's house, where I'd always find for my own use that very same towel. So two and two were tossed together to untangle what had taken place, and it hit me. Suddenly, I realized that my bath towel has taken up the legacy of my grandmother's towel. You see, her towel and I grew up together, and my towel and I are growing old together. I didn't know till that moment that in the mystic maze of my mind, my bath towel over the past 30 years has ripened to represent and remind me of the comfort, of the constancy of everything about grandmothers. Now think about this with me, will you please? During your so-called halcyon days of youth, your scooter days, your radio flyer days, your first bike and beyond days, days of the randomness, tumult, and adjustments of your chaotic childhood, was there ever anything that felt as steady and even, as honest and fair? Did anything shroud you with security and comfort quite like the constancy of a grandmother in her home? Well, not for me and many, I imagine. Eventually, though, and far too soon, we all realize that our grandmothers are not eternally constant. And when my grandmother turned 92, 3 grandchildren converged upon our home for the family visit. I was the first to arrive, and it was so good to get a hug from my grandmother. And all was right with the world once more in the warm womb of her never-changing home. But as I prepared for an afternoon dip in her little stock tank pool, I had to say, "Grandmother, I can't seem to find that towel that I always use when I swim here." And my grandmother had to say, "That towel? Oh, Tommy, that towel got old and wore out and not much use to anyone anymore. So it's been tucked away in a box someplace. So find no further fuss about that towel. There are plenty of towels in the bathroom that'll dry you well." Oh. Well, that evening my sister arrived, and while she was installing some sheets on a couch, I overheard her sing out, "Grandmother, I can't seem to find that pillow I always use when I sleep here." Well, I saw my grandmother go in, and I heard her break the news. "That pillow? Oh, child, that pillow got old and wore out and not much use to anyone anymore. So it's been tucked away in a box someplace. So find no further fuss about that pillow. There are plenty of pillows in the den that'll sleep you well." Oh. That morning, our slumbers were cut short. We being rudely aroused about 1/2 rooster by uncalled for clatter coming from the kitchen. My braggart brother had blown in, boasting and berating. Our lunch today could have been the best roast anyone ever lapped the lip over. But grandmother, I can't seem to find that Dutch oven I always use when I cook here. That Dutch oven! Lord, that Dutch oven, that cast iron Dutch oven got old and wore out and not much use to anyone anymore. It's been tucked away in a box someplace, so find no further fuss about that Dutch oven. There are plenty of pots in the pantry that'll cook for you well. Ow. Well, after our so-so lunch, we drove grandmother around to see several senior community apartments. But at the end of the day, she'd listened to nothing more about our notions of her moving. So at the end of the weekend, we left with nothing more than our worries of her staying. A decade passed quickly. Grandmother passed quietly. So 3 grandchildren converged upon our home for the family divvy. We doled out keepsakes all day long, then discovered, hidden away in the corner of the garage, a box. Well, we approached that box eagerly, but respectfully, opened it carefully, and oh, so joyously, a flood of memories swept over me, going all the way back. For there was that towel I'd used all those years, resting on top of a pillow, nestled against a Dutch oven. Well, we buried that box and all its contents with my grandmother, all except a note she left inside, which read, "To my dear grandchildren, I know I got old and wore out and not much use to anyone anymore. So you almost tucked me away in a box of a place so you'd find no further fuss about your grandmother. There are plenty of grandmothers in apartments who can live in them well, but I wasn't ready for that. So you let me stay. And some of my best years have been these final quiet ones, in the comfort of the constancy of my own home, graced by your frequent visits. And I thank you dearly for that." The box.
Okay. Well, they can't put you in a box. That was unboxable, uncontainable, unstoppable. It was a tornado of talk. You've got the gift of the gab.
I wasn't trying to, but I think I broke most of the rules that you had suggested.
That's fine. No, in rap, that's called freestyling. In jazz, it's called having swing. You have swing. And, you were speaking poetry. Sometimes it rhymed, sometimes it didn't. Maybe some of it was memorized, some of it was not, but it was flowing poetry. Wonderful.
Well, that's what I aim to do. I kind of mix the two forms in what I call poestoetry. And one guild said I combined the art forms horridly. But some people don't like things that don't stick to all the rules. I'm just learning how to do this. I'm not a poet, but one art form is not quite enough for me. I like lots of art.
Great. And it's
And,
wonderful to know that free expression lives in Texas.
yeah.
Unbridled. Denise.
I love that. And me listening to you, I loved the alliteration. I loved the bits of assonance that were in there. I know that you worked on that piece and because it just shines. It's so polished and the work even to go back in there and to get it down with your pauses so it's not just, I don't like the word gimmick, but I'm going to say the the trick part of it with all of the alliteration in there, but you have this wonderful underlying and relatable story that is there that, at least for me, beyond the okay, lots of alliteration and it sounds good, it got me to lean in closer because I could relate to all of the things that you do. Now, my windows, I put up the plastic and use the hair dryer. Doors, yes, I roll something up and put it at the doors, but all of the different things that you did, I've done similar things. So I was love that, but the part about your grandmother and a part about the connections that are made to those items, that when we see them, smell them, taste them, they just bring back the flood of memories of lovely things that we don't ever want to give up. That was the anchor of that story, which took it from being well crafted wordsmithing to really meaningful and relatable. Tom, I just absolutely loved that. And I hope to connect with you after this. I thought that you were just lovely. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Denise. It means a lot to me, and I really appreciate the fact that it made you lean in, as you say. I saw you get up there and move your chair to the back of the room, so maybe you need a compass or something to know your directions a little bit better. But but I certainly
Just
appreciate everything you said.
where I am right here, it's 90 degrees with 90% humidity, and I don't have air conditioning.
Okay.
So it's it's hot, but I'm keeping cool, and you helped me to keep cool. So thanks. Thanks for that.
All right, I'd like to read y'all a little something that I wrote for the introduction, but I scrapped at the last minute. I do have a really bad habit of modifying my stories just right up until the last moment. But it seemed a little bit too arrogant, but yet I'll for some reason I'll tell you now anyway. And that is, you may notice a form in which the story is infused with raw rudiments of hack poetry. Anchored at the bottom are right-brained improbable truths, but floating above is a left-brained sound-based layer of dry humor making its mischief. A style of writing I call poestoetry. So that's kind of what I do in a lot of my stories. So I do appreciate y'all listening and nodding occasionally.
You gave us a clinic in using numerous verbal arts, the rhythm, the rhyme, talking in time, the elongation of vowels. It was such a sunny day. You're very good at the elongation of vowels. So thank you for telling and demonstrating all these techniques for us.
And I do want to say one more thing that, especially for Denise, not from what she said now, but for what she said earlier, and for others to think about this. And I'm sorry that Bruce Marcus is not with us right now. He was here much, much earlier. You may not realize that most of that story was memorized. I am a memorizer. And some of our great storytellers are memorizers. And especially with Zoom, and you've had a chance to go to a lot of festivals that you wouldn't normally go to. And if you've been following some tellers for many years, and you know tellers that preach and even write books about how wrong it is to memorize stories. And you start seeing them place after place after place telling the same story. And you find out that the more they tell a certain story, the closer and closer and closer it gets to being almost exactly the same. They end up memorizing it. And for us memorizers, the more we tell our stories, the more freedom that gives us to look at our audience and to know our story well enough to be able to change it on the fly. And our stories get broader and broader. the more we tell them. So I think over a long enough period of time, the variance in our stories for a memorizer and a non-memorizer is about the same. That's my observation.
Yes, I think you do a lot of changing on the fly. And just the way you talk, you got a certain way of talking with the rhythm and the breathing. So there's no getting away from it.
Well, I am an educated person, but we call that folksy down here in Texas.
Okay. Very good. All right. Anyone else? Final thought? Denise, go ahead.
I just wanted to tag on there. I had mentioned that earlier. Some people, no, you can't memorize. And the thing is, I take so much stock and value in traditional folk tales and the original versions of them going back before somebody cleverly changed them because they have such profound messages to them. And when I think of the early days and what the oral tradition is, the oral tradition was hearing stories over and over and over again before they were written down. And you knew every nuance, and you knew where the pauses came in, and you knew what words were stressed, and you knew what was said in a sarcastic manner versus something that was said as plain truth. And a lot of those stories, when they were eventually written down, were lost in the oral tradition, so that we really don't know how they were intended. And so memorization is not, first of all, it's wonderful brain exercise, but it's also the thing that captures a cultural aspect. Like, how many of us know Twinkle Twinkle Little Star? We know so many different things just from hearing it, or learns, different bits of poetry and pledges and things like that. It's all through osmosis, and it's something that's done. But to sit down and find a piece that grips you, or to work on a piece that grips you, and to go through it and to like examine each word and commit them to memory and figure out how to say the phrases, and so that it gets that particular message across. And you can use the same words and still tell a story in 1,000 different ways. And it does depend on the audience and why it is that you're sharing it. And I just want to say, when I did my story, I learned something today, which is I really don't need to mention whether there is a word for stone in Spanish or not. It doesn't matter. The point was that I overlooked whether or not my student would know that word and what it meant. And so that's also something that's very telling. So thank you. There's another new information that comes into my head. This has been absolutely wonderful. Eric, thank you for inviting me to do this. And I look forward to sharing with you again.
Great.
Okay.
Go ahead.
If we don't have to close yet, I want to say one more thing. And if there ever is a time where I could get on a high horse, I guess after my story is it. I don't brag all that much, but traditional stories are really the best thing to use to learn how to tell a personal experience story. Now, my story, all my stories are informed by the methods of traditional stories. At least I try for them to be. Now, there were three children here that went to my grandmother's house. There are three things that happen, all very similar, and that happens in so many traditional stories, folk tales. There's a lot of repetition. There's repetition that's separated from early and late, and so you hear these things. Sometimes it's just sounds, and so I tell people that are doing personal stories that they can teach themselves best by studying folk tales. That's what I do. I think that we derive a great deal of comfort from from familiarity. So I use some words on purpose more than once because there's a tiny element of comfort when you hear something you've heard before. Now, it may be an unusual word. So you use an unusual word twice, or words that, well, just poetry itself is sounds that sound similar. That gives us just a little bit of comfort, a little bit of safety. So I think that's why poetry and music is successful. And I try to bring that into storytelling. And truthfully, I consider myself a beginner. There are very few storytellers would have nearly the years of experience I have as a beginner. And I am and I'm a beginner. I've reached a certain level and I've stayed there. But I'm sort of out of my league at what I'm talking about. But I'm actually better at analyzing stories than I am at telling them. But anyway, I appreciate everything that you do, Eric, and I appreciate everyone that stayed around and listened, and I hope that we all get to do it again someday soon.
Sure, and with most storytelling, there's some memorizing and something surprising.
Good way to put it.
Okay, that rhyme was inspired by you.
Oh,
Okay, shall we say good night and good morning? Great. So these recordings will go up on YouTube soon, and you'll receive the links. And if any of the
Yep.
storytellers want an actual recording, just let me know, and I'll also send you the recording. Okay.
Eric, can
Yes.
I just quickly post the little black doll? I sent it to one person instead of to everybody.
Sure. How do you want to do it? You put it in the chat section? Susan, you're on mute.
I just put it in the chat section now. Yeah.
Okay, in what form? An actual doll? Or
Can you see it in the chat? Hopefully I didn't make the same error and I sent it to everybody, or just
yeah, the information
one
is there.
person?
Yeah, okay,
Okay.
everyone.
All right.
Before we close, if you want that information, go in and copy it.
Thank you.
And I'll also, oh, that reminds me, I'll try to save the chat section. Okay, thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
See you soon.